Hey everyone, my name's Andy. My channel's Finding Value. If you like investing in undervalued commodities, I mainly talk about commodities. Sometimes I get into some of these topics like this. Subscribe to the channel if you like that type of stuff. Give me a thumbs up for the content and leave comments below in the comment section. This one, I'm calling it efficiency is more consumption. We're going to talk about renewable energy as well. So I read an article, and a lot of this is from an article that I read. I agree wholeheartedly with it. This is from an engineering kind of physics standpoint and looking at energy and efficiency. So let's jump into the presentation. This may go counter to a lot of people who are very green. So hopefully I've got my points here. So the argument here, and this is from my point of view, is it seems whatever argument you make, efficiency leads to more consumption. And that efficiency, really what it does is it makes it more affordable for whatever that thing is. And we have more of its use and value to society. It becomes the more affordable something gets. All technological advancements in the use of energy will ultimately increase its use and the eventual increase of energy because it makes it more affordable to everyone else to afford it. So more people use it. More people use it, the demand goes way up. The value is in the commodities themselves, which have physical barriers to extraction and energy constraints. This isn't like we're shrinking down components in a computer. What we're doing is actually using energy to extract physical items out of the ground. It's very different than making a software update or making efficiency gains in software or something like that. The argument isn't about efficiency in terms of economics, but in terms of energy. Energy, not economics. It doesn't matter how much something costs at some point. It's going to be in terms of energy and the energy densities, and we're going to get into all this. So what I'm going to say is oil is superior to renewables at this moment, and I think they always will be until we develop something else, and I'm going to go into this. Scientists have yet to discover and entrepreneurs have yet to invent anything as remarkable as hydrocarbons in terms of the combination of low cost, high energy density, stability, safety, and portability. We have not found anything that can come close to those of fossil fuels. In practical terms, this means that spending $1 million on utility scale wind turbines or solar panels will each, over the 30 years of operation, produce about 50 million kilowatt hours. While an equivalent $1 million spent on a shale rig produces enough natural gas over 30 years to generate over 300 million kilowatt hours. It is 6 times as, we'll call it, it produces 6 times the amount of energy for the same amount of money. I don't think from an economic standpoint that we will do renewable wind turbines or solar panels or any of that, given the returns of energy per dollar spent from that statistic. Solar technology. Solar technologies have improved greatly and will continue to become cheaper and more efficient, but the era of tenfold gains is over. The physics boundary for silicon photovoltaic cells, the Shockley, I don't know how to say that last one, limit is a maximum conversion of 34% of photons into electrons. The best commercial PV technology today exceeds 26%. So we're not going to see very large increases of efficiency in solar panels because we're already exceeding a pretty high level today. Renewable boundaries here. So wind power technology has also improved greatly, but here too, no tenfold gains are left. The physics boundary for a wind turbine, the Betz limit, is a maximum capture of 60% of kinetic energy in moving air. Commercial turbines today exceed 40%. The annual output of Tesla's gigafactory, the world's largest battery factory, could store 3 minutes worth of annual US electricity demand. Wow. The annual output of Tesla's gigafactory, the world's largest battery factory, could store 3 minutes worth of annual US. So the annual output of Tesla's factory can only store 3 minutes worth of electricity demand. That's ridiculous. I had to read that a couple times to get it. It would require 1,000 years of production, 1,000 years of production to make enough batteries for 2 days worth of US electricity demand. 1,000 years worth. Meanwhile, 500 to 100 pounds of materials are mined, moved, and processed for every pound of battery produced. That is ridiculous, and it's inefficient. So here's a 90-fold increase in renewables. Today's reality, hydrocarbons, oil, natural gas, and coal supply 84% of global energy, a share that has decreased only modestly from 87% 2 decades ago. Over those 2 decades, total world energy rose by 50%, an amount equal to adding 2 entire United States worth of demand. To completely replace hydrocarbons over the next 20 years, global renewable energy production would have to increase by at least 90-fold. For context, it took half a century for global oil and gas production to expand by 10-fold. It is a fantasy to think, costs aside, that any new form of energy infrastructure could now expand 9 times more than that under half the time, let alone 90-fold. The scope of this task that we are trying to embark to replace hydrocarbons here is, if the initial goal were more modest, say to replace hydrocarbons only in the United States and only those used in electricity generation, not the cars, just electricity, just the generation of electricity. A transition to 100% non-hydrocarbon electricity by 2050 would require a U.S. grid construction program 14-fold bigger than the grid build-out rate that has taken place over the past half a century. This is not going to happen, guys. Then, to finish the transformation, this Promethean effort would need to be more than doubled to tackle non-electric sectors where 70% of the U.S. hydrocarbons are consumed. And all that would affect is a mere 16% of world energy use, America's share, for all of that effort. This daunting challenge elicits a common response. If we can put a man on the moon, surely we can, fill in the blank with any aspirational goal. But transforming the energy economy is not like putting a few people on the moon a few times. This is like putting all of humanity on the moon permanently. That is how big of a task that they think they can do. It's not going to happen. Energy storage. It costs less than $1 a barrel to store oil or natural gas in an energy equivalent form for a couple of months. $1. The US on average has about 1 to 2 months worth of national demand and storage for each kind of hydrocarbon at any given time. Meanwhile, with batteries, we're going to go to batteries, it costs roughly $200 to store the energy equivalent to 1 barrel of oil, which is just $1. So it's 200 times as expensive using batteries. Thus, instead of months, barely 2 hours of national electricity demand can be stored in the combined total of all the utility scale batteries on the grid, plus all of the batteries in the 1 million electric cars that exist today. So every single electric car and every single utility scale battery could store 2 hours worth of electricity. Since hydrocarbons are so easily stored, idle conventional power plants can be dispatched, ramped up and down to follow cyclical demand for electricity. Wind turbines and solar arrays cannot be dispatched when there's no wind or sun. As a matter of geophysics, both wind-powered and sunlight-energized machines produce energy averaged over a year about 25 to 30% of the time, often less. That means that only 25 to 30% of the time that they're going to be producing electricity. Conventional power plants, however, have a very high availability in the 80 to 95% range, and often higher. A wind-solar grid would need to be sized to meet both peak demand and to have enough extra capacity beyond peak needs in order to produce and store additional electricity when the sun and wind are available. A pure wind-solar system would necessarily have to be about 3-fold the capacity of a hydrocarbon grid. One needs to build 3 kilowatts of wind-solar equipment for every 1 kilowatt of combustion equipment eliminated. That directly translates into a 3-fold cost disadvantage, even if the per kilowatt costs were all the same, which they're not. So let's see this in real time on on a chart the European wind, solar capacity, and electricity prices. These are the furthest ones that have adopted the most green energy, and they all have the most expensive electricity prices by a long shot. The costs of renewables. The increased use of wind solar imposes a variety of hidden physics-based costs that are rarely acknowledged in utility or government accounting. For example, when large quantities of power are rapidly, repeatedly, and unpredictably cycled up and down, the challenge and costs associated with balancing those cycles on the grid are greatly increased. And the costs are estimated to be 20 to 50% to the cost of grid kilowatt hours. So it increases costs by 20 to 50%. Furthermore, flipping the role of the grid's existing power plants from primary to backup for wind, solar, leads to other real but unallocated costs that emerge from physical realities. Increased cycling of conventional power plants increases wear and tear and maintenance costs. It also reduces the utilization of those expensive assets, which means that capital costs are spread out over fewer kilowatt hours produced, thereby arithmetically increasing the cost of each of those kilowatt hours. Again, guys, this is ridiculous, what we're trying to do with renewables. After a total system outage in South Australia in 2018, Tesla, with much media fanfare, installed the world's single largest lithium battery farm on that grid. For context, to keep South Australia lit for 1/2 day of no wind would require 80 such world's biggest Tesla battery farms, and that's on a grid that serves just 2.5 million people. That's ridiculous. Energy storage. So how many batteries would be needed to store, say, not 2 months, but 2 days worth of nation's electricity? This is just 2 days. The 5 billion Tesla gigafactory in Nevada is currently the world's biggest battery manufacturing facility. Its total annual production could store 3 minutes worth of annual U.S. electricity demand. So the entire annual production could store 3 minutes. Thus, in order to fabricate a quantity of batteries to store 2 days worth of U.S. electricity demand would require 1,000 years of gigafactory production. Battery mining. Let's look at the mining here, because this is a mining commodity channel. Radically increasing battery production will dramatically affect mining, as well as the energy used to access, process, and move minerals and the energy needed for the battery fabrication process itself. About 60 pounds of batteries are needed to store the energy equivalent of that in 1 pound of hydrocarbons. Meanwhile, 50 to 100 pounds of various materials are mined, moved, and processed for 1 pound of battery produced. Such underlying realities translate into enormous quantities of minerals such as lithium, copper, nickel, graphite, rare earths, and cobalt. Hey, look, those are all the ones that we have on this channel. That would need to be extracted from the earth to fabricate batteries for grids and cars. A battery-centric future means a world mining gigatons more materials. And this says nothing about the gigatons of materials needed to fabricate wind turbines and solar arrays too. So even without a new energy economy, the mining required to make batteries will soon dominate the production of many minerals. Lithium battery production today already accounts for about 40% and 25% respectively of all lithium and cobalt mining. In an all battery future, global mining would have to expand by more than 200% for copper, by at least 500% for minerals like lithium, graphite, and rare earths, and far more than that for cobalt. Oil use for batteries. So then there are the hydrocarbons and electricity needed to undertake all the mining activities and to fabricate the batteries themselves. In rough terms, it requires the energy equivalent of about 100 barrels of oil to fabricate a quantity of batteries that can store a single barrel of oil equivalent. That is lunacy. That's ludicrous. 100 barrels spent for 1 barrel back of battery. I'm sorry, guys. China already dominates global battery manufacturing and is on track to supply nearly 2/3 of production by 2020. We'll skip that there. Oil consumption. Such a ban is not easy to imagine. Optimists forecast that the number of EVs in the world will rise from today's nearly 4 million to 400 million in 2 decades. A world with 400 million EVs by 2040 would decrease global oil demand by barely 6%. There are about 1 billion automobiles today, and they use about 30% of the world's oil. Heavy trucks, aviation, petrochemicals, heat, etc. use the rest. By 2040, there would be an estimated 2 billion cars in the world, 400 million EVs, would amount to 20% of all the cars on the road, which would thus replace about 6% of petroleum demand. Here's the cost reductions for wind and solar power, just to show you what they're doing. They're asymptotically approaching a number that they can't really lower very much. So we're not going to see lower costs for wind and solar power generation. The tail of the tape, battery versus hydrocarbon energy density. The energy density in internal combustion engines can still increase. And right here, this is about as good as we're going to get for battery. It can go up a teeny bit, but not very much for a theoretical. We can go way up here for a theoretical in terms of internal combustion engines. We can actually increase the efficiency of internal combustion engines a lot more so than we can with batteries right now. Shale oil and extraction efficiency. Now this could actually be a very good investment opportunity. So it says, finally, when it comes to limits, it is relevant to note that the technologies that unlock shale oil and gas are still in the early days of engineering and development, unlike the older technologies of wind, solar, and batteries. Tenfold gains are still possible in terms of how much energy can be extracted by a rig from shale rock before approaching physics limits. This fact helps explain why shale oil and gas have added 2,000% more to U.S. energy production over the past decade than have wind and solar combined. So it's already adding more than 2,000% more than those others. Grid demand. All this has relevance for encouraging EVs. In terms of managing the inconvenient cyclical nature of demand, shifting transportation fuel use from oil to the grid will make peak management far more challenging. So we have problems with peak demand if we all went and charged our electric vehicles, because what we're going to do is drive it to work, drive it on back, and then we're all going to plug it in at the same time, increasing the peak demand problem. People tend to refuel when it's convenient. That's easy to accommodate with oil, given the ease of storage. EV refueling will exacerbate the already episodic nature of grid demand, which is the up-down wave. Self-driving cars and problems. Although kilowatt hours in cars, key targets in the new energy economy prescriptions constitute only 60% of the energy economy. Global demand for both is centuries away from saturation. Green enthusiasts make extravagant claims about the effect of Uber-like options in self-driving cars. Think Kathy Woods. However, the data show that the economic efficiencies from Uberizing have so far increased the use of cars and peak urban congestion. More congestion, more cars. Similarly, many analysts now see autonomous vehicles amplifying, not dampening that effect, making the effect worse. So the efficiency versus cost efficiency, that's because people and thus markets are focused on economic efficiency and not energy efficiency. The former can be associated with reducing energy use, but is also and more often associated with increased energy demand. Cars use more energy per mile than a horse, but the former offers enormous gains in economic efficiency. Computers similarly use far more energy than pencil and paper. So increased energy consumption. Every energy conversion in our universe entails built-in inefficiencies, converting heat to propulsion, carbohydrates to motion, photons to electrons, electrons to data, and so forth. All entail a certain energy cost or waste that can be reduced but never eliminated. But in no small irony, history shows, as economists have often noted, that improvements in efficiency lead to increased, not decreased, energy consumption. Today's aircraft, for example, are 3 times as energy efficient as the first commercial passenger jets in the 1950s. That didn't reduce fuel use, but propelled air traffic to soar, and with it, a 4-fold rise in jet fuel being burned. So energy efficiency drives consumption. Similarly, it was the astounding gains in computing energy efficiency that drove the meteoric rise in data traffic on the internet, which resulted in far more energy used by computing. Global computing and communications all told now consumes the energy equivalent of 3 billion barrels of oil per year, more energy than global aviation. Increasing energy efficiency versus increasing demand. So we're getting more efficient with computing efficiency and the demand's going exponential. Same with this. Demand's going up, up, up for global traffic, air traffic that is, versus energy efficiency and flying efficiency. Here's global efficiency improves, energy demand rises. Energy per unit GDP, everything's going up for demand for the world. So we're getting close here, guys. The issue here is not only that poorer people will inevitably want to and will be able to live more like wealthier people, but that new inventions continually create new demands for energy. The invention of the aircraft means that every 1 billion in new jets produced leads to some 5 billion in aviation fuel consumed over the 2 decades to operate them. Similarly, every 1 billion in data centers built will consume 7 billion in electricity over the same period. The world is buying both at the rate of about 100 billion a year. So this is going to go vertical for demand. Google tried and failed here. More than a decade ago, Google focused its vaunted engineering talent on a project called REC, seeking to develop renewable energy cheaper than coal. After the project was canceled in 2014, Google's lead engineers wrote, "Incremental improvements to existing energy technologies aren't enough. We need something truly disruptive. We don't have the answers." Those engineers rediscovered the kinds of physics and scale realities highlighted in this presentation. So the conclusion here is hydrocarbons, oil, natural gas, and coal are the world's principal energy resource today and will continue to be so in the foreseeable future. Wind turbines, solar arrays, and batteries, meanwhile, constitute a small source of energy, and physics dictates that they will remain so. Meanwhile, there is simply no possibility that the world is undergoing or can undergo a near-term transition to a new energy economy. So what does this all mean? It means that we should be investing in fossil fuels because renewables are not viable alternatives. Sorry for the long presentation. I know this was getting pretty long, but I think it's very important to understand this stuff because I'm very heavily invested in uranium and also in natural gas and oil. I think that they are irreplaceable at this time until we find another power generation source. These are not viable. We have no way to store that energy, and they are not energy dense enough, whether that be batteries, and they don't produce enough energy in terms of energy return on energy invested for the wind turbines and solar panels. If you guys like this content, give me a thumbs up. Leave comments below on what you guys think. Thanks for listening. This is Finding Value.